Well, let's just begin with some breaking news coming out of Kenya. Its opposition leader, Raila Odinga, has withdrawn from the presidential election due to be run later this month. Now, there had been numerous protests since the electoral body announced the incumbent President Uhuru Kenyatta as the winner of the August 8th election. Let's get more on this with our correspondent, Mohammed Adow. You covered the election, Mohammed. It's an amazing announcement to make. Nobody was really expecting this.
This was huge. This is really huge because Raila Odinga had said from the beginning that he was not going to take part in the elections if there are no reforms at the Electoral Commission. And now that he's saying the Electoral Commission has stonewalled and refused to reform, I think this is a very drastic measure he has taken, perhaps with the hope that now people are going to listen to him more carefully and organize those reforms.
How does this actually play into the judgment of the Supreme Court that seemed to be on the side of the opposition leader when it came to the way they felt the election was run?
Well, what the Supreme Court did was nullify the result and declare the election results null and void, which means they've agreed with the complaints presented to the court by Raila Odinga's party, which had said that the election was rigged and the server was hacked into. Now, there was very little room for maneuver here. 60 days, an election had to be held. What Raila wanted was at first some extensive reforms at the Electoral Commission, but later on he said that he was willing to have only the Secretariat, the people who are not the commissioners, which would be very difficult to replace, to go. And that's who he wanted to go, the administrative part of the commission. What we're seeing is a situation where no one has left the Electoral Commission so far, although the Supreme Court was really clear in saying that it's the Electoral Commission that is to blame for the rigged election results.
This creates now a huge problem across the public now, possibly in Kenya, and there'll be a real worry from regional capitals as well as the outside world looking at what has been in the past one of the most stable democracies in East Africa.
Indeed. This increases the uncertainty that we've already been seeing in Kenya ever since the Supreme Court declared the results null and void. But again, there are no two ways about it. The elections have to be held on the 26th. It's up to Raila Odinga again to either reconsider that decision he's just taken and start campaigning and ask his followers to come out and vote for him, or it's Uhuru becomes the only candidate.
Is it as simple as that? If Raila Odinga does and has withdrawn from the election campaign, is Uhuru Kenyatta then the incumbent president, renamed the president, or were there other candidates, were there other parties that could fight this election?
The Supreme Court decided that the contest was now between the two leading contenders. Uhuru, who was declared the winner of that August 8th election, and Raila Odinga. Now, there will be an issue of legitimacy, definitely. But again, you cannot avoid those elections because not holding them will mean the country will be in a constitutional crisis.
For the moment, Mohammed, thank you very much for giving us your input there. Let's cross over to the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, where Catherine Soy, our other correspondent, is also waiting to speak to us. She also followed the election. This news has come as quite a shock. Nobody was expecting it, Catherine.
Nobody wasn't expecting it, Sohail. Unprecedented times indeed in Kenya. This press conference that we're talking about is still going on right now. The other senior members of the NASA, that's opposition coalition, have spoken, and we were listening in earlier to Raila Odinga making this statement saying that the NASA coalition has officially withdrawn from the election. And these are statements that we've been hearing for the last couple of days. Supporters of Raila Odinga, other senior officials saying the same thing, that they will boycott the election. They were even saying that we will not just boycott the election, there will be no elections. So a lot of uncertainty there with people asking, what does that statement mean, that there will be no election? Does it mean that there's going to be disruptions, particularly in the strongholds of Raila Odinga? So this is quite surprising news, and people asking, why is it that, you know, you go to court, the court rules in your favor, and then you come and withdraw from the election, and this election has been set up because of the petition that you filed. But Raila Odinga said, and you know, his NASA coalition has been saying, Sohail, that the IEBC, that's the Electoral Commission, has refused to even listen to some of the demands, very reasonable demands they're saying that they have been making. For example, Raila Odinga has been saying that he doesn't want to go through an election that has been conducted by the same individuals who had participated or who oversaw the last election, which he says is fraudulent. He also says that some companies that were involved in the transmission of results, that were involved in printing of ballot papers, should be replaced as well. IEBC officials saying that this cannot happen, the time is too short for this, they have very little time to prepare. So Raila Odinga there in that press conference saying that he will not participate in another fraudulent election, in another shoddily planned election. He will not participate because there is no fair playing ground.
If that's the case, Catherine, then we can see certainly Raila Odinga on our camera screens to the right of the current speaker, who's at the podium at the moment. He's wearing the orange tie there, listening intently, as are all of those opposition members and coalition partners with Raila Odinga. What sort of, and perhaps you might not be able to answer this as succinctly, but what sort of constitutional problems does this cause now? If you have the only presidential candidate, I'll ask you that question in a moment. Let's just listen to what the opposition leader has to say. He's coming to the microphone again.
The chairman of the Independent Electoral Boundaries Commission is Kula Chebukati. The letter reads, "Dear sir, withdrawal of candidature in the first presidential election. The withdrawal of candidature in the first presidential election. The above matter refers, following the nullification of the presidential election held on the 8th August 2017 and the subsequent gazettement by the Commission of the undersigned as presidential candidate and running mate for a fresh election that we have scheduled for 26th October 2017, we hereby withdraw our candidature with immediate effect. Yours faithfully, signed Honorable Raila Odinga, Honorable Stephen Kalonzo Musyoka."
Raila Odinga there making a very clear, short statement at this live press conference about what he intends to do.
Stamped and received by the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission on the 10th of October.
And there you have it. We weren't quite expecting him to come back to the podium again. Raila Odinga, the man who was fighting the incumbent president. Let's go back to Catherine Saw, who's been watching events there for us. Catherine, this does sort of create a sort of constitutional crisis, doesn't it? If you have only two presidential candidates for the election itself, then one actually withdraws. Surely the incumbent becomes the president if he's not willing to fight another election. It's a real dilemma, not just for the Election Commission, but are we heading back to the courts again?
That is the big question. It is a big dilemma. The law is kind of silent about a lot of these things. The Constitution is clear about what happens if a sitting president is indisposed, what happens if a candidate withdraws. But again, Jubilee Party, that's a ruling party, officials led by the president have been going around saying that the election is going to happen anyway and the president is going to be declared a winner unopposed. We've heard the IEBC also saying that the election is going to carry on despite Raila Odinga's withdrawal. But beside the constitutional problems, despite the law that is a bit vague and doesn't really envisage this situation, what people are really questioning is the legitimacy legitimacy of Uhuru Kenyatta presidency now. And like you rightly mentioned, there's only 2 candidates on the ballot paper for now. There's a third candidate who went to court demanding to be on the ballot paper. We've not had a ruling for that case yet. But for now, only 2 candidates in there. If Raila Odinga withdraws like he has, it's really going to question the legitimacy of Uhuru Kenyatta as president if he is declared as is. Raila Odinga has huge support as well. If the last election is anything to go by, he had about more than 6 million people voting for him. So this splits the country right in the middle, at least the voters. So people will say, you know, Raila Odinga withdraws, Uhuru Kenyatta is declared president, is sworn in, but that means leaving a country very deeply divided. He's only elected by 1/2 of the country. So it's really a test to the legitimacy of Uhuru Kenyatta presidency, and people saying that, you know, going forth is going to be very difficult for Uhuru Kenyatta to really stamp his authority and say he is a president who has been elected by the people of Kenya.
If this is the case now, we're seeing Raila Odinga withdraw from this race. One wonders how the public at large are going to react, because the party and Raila Odinga's followers and coalition partners are saying that they want to see widespread national demonstrations in the country on Wednesday with a slogan of no reforms, no elections. Great slogans to have, but at the end of the day, there will be obviously some sort of, as we've just mentioned and just talked about, some legal avenues that will have to be crossed and addressed to find out who actually is running this country after the 26th of October.
Absolutely. And again, it depends to Sohail who you talk to in Kenya. Like I said, the country is deeply divided. People who are supporting Raila Odinga say that he is well within his rights to withdraw from the election, that there is no way that their leader can participate in an election they feel is already planned ahead, is already an election that is, how can you say, an election that is already, they're talking about, there's already plans to rig, they're talking about the IEBC Electoral Commission not really doing what they should do. For example, making sure that the people who oversaw the last election are not in charge of this election as well. So people saying, his supporters, Raila Odinga, saying that he's well within his rights. And like I said, we've been hearing the supporters and other, you know, senior leaders of the NASA coalition saying that we will not just boycott the election, there will not be an election. So what does this mean? And like I said, a lot of people worried about the consequences of that. If the election is going to take place anyway on the 26th, are people in Raila Odinga's strongholds going to vote? And if they vote, what's going to happen? Are there going to be disruptions there? The returning officers who are supposed to be transmitting election results forms to the National Tallying Center, is this going to happen? And if results from those areas that Raila Odinga, where Raila Odinga supporters are, strongholds of Raila Odinga, if those areas don't vote and results form are not transmitted to the National Tallying Center, what does this mean legally? So a lot of loopholes, like you say, and this leaves room for